I want to tell you about a man who never wrote a single word. A man who owned almost nothing. A man who looked like a satyr, walked around barefoot, and made a habit of stopping strangers in the marketplace to ask them uncomfortable questions. And for this, they killed him. His name was Socrates. And his death, in 399 BC, is one of the most significant moments in human history. Not because of how he died, but because of why, and more importantly, because of how he faced it. Imagine this. You're 70 years old. You've spent your entire life pursuing truth, questioning assumptions, trying to make your city better and wiser. You've never harmed anyone. You've never stolen, never lied, never betrayed your principles. And then your own democracy, the system you believed in, the people you tried to help, puts you on trial. The charges are vague: corrupting the youth, not believing in the gods of the city. The real crime? Making powerful people look foolish by asking questions they couldn't answer. You're given a choice. Stop asking questions, apologize, go into exile, or die. And you choose death. Not because you want to die, but because living without the freedom to question, to think, to pursue truth, that's not living at all. Tonight, we're going to explore who Socrates was, what he did that was so threatening, why they killed him, and what his final hours can teach us about living with integrity in a world that often punishes it. So settle in and prepare to meet the man who died because he refused to stop thinking. Socrates was born around 470 BC in Athens, during what would become the city's golden age. This was the Athens of Pericles, of democracy, of the Parthenon, of theater and philosophy and unprecedented cultural achievement. And Socrates, this brilliant, strange, difficult man, spent his entire adult life wandering around this magnificent city, stopping people and asking them questions. Not small talk. Not pleasantries. Deep, probing, relentless questions designed to expose what people didn't actually know, but claimed to. He would approach a politician and ask, "You say you pursue justice. But what is justice? Can you define it?" The politician would give an answer. Something confident, something everyone would nod along to. And then Socrates would ask a follow-up question. And another. And another. Gently, patiently, persistently dissecting the answer until it fell apart, until contradictions emerged, until it became obvious that this person, who claimed to know about justice, actually had no clear idea what justice was. He did this with generals, with poets, with craftsmen, with anyone who claimed expertise or wisdom. And every time, the same pattern: confident answer, followed by careful questioning, followed by the collapse of certainty. He called himself a gadfly, a pest, a horsefly that bites a lazy horse to keep it moving. Athens was the horse. Comfortable, self-satisfied, convinced of its own wisdom and superiority. And Socrates was the irritating bite that wouldn't let the city rest in its assumptions. He said his role was to sting Athens into self-awareness, into actually examining whether what they believed was true, whether how they lived was good. And Athens, like most horses when bitten, did not appreciate it. But here's the thing: Socrates wasn't just being difficult. He wasn't playing games or showing off. He genuinely believed that most people walk through life asleep, operating on autopilot, following traditions and assumptions they've never actually examined. We claim to value things: justice, courage, wisdom, love. But have we ever stopped to ask what these words actually mean? Do we really know what we're talking about? Or are we just repeating what we've been told? Socrates believed that an unexamined life, a life lived without questioning your beliefs and values, was not worth living. Those are his words. The unexamined life is not worth living. Not just inferior. Not just less good. Not worth living at all. That's a radical claim. And he meant it literally. He would rather die than stop examining, stop questioning, stop pursuing truth. And eventually, Athens would force him to prove it. Now, Socrates was also deeply weird. Ancient sources describe him as ugly, with bulging eyes, a flat nose, a potbelly. He wore the same simple cloak year-round. He went barefoot everywhere, even in winter. He was poor, having neglected any kind of money-making career to spend his time philosophizing. He would stand in one spot for hours, completely still, lost in thought. Once, during a military campaign, he reportedly stood frozen in contemplation from dawn until the next dawn, a full 24 hours, while soldiers gathered to watch this strange phenomenon. He was married to Xantippe, who ancient sources describe as sharp-tongued and frustrated with her husband's priorities. Hard to blame her. Socrates spent his days talking philosophy while she managed a household with no money. He had friends, students, admirers, young men from wealthy families, who found him fascinating and followed him around, learning his method of questioning. This would later be used against him. He's corrupting the youth, teaching them to question their parents and the city's traditions. But Socrates claimed he wasn't teaching anything. He said he knew nothing. He had no wisdom to impart. He was just asking questions, helping others realize they didn't know what they thought they knew either. This became his famous declaration. I know that I know nothing. Everyone else claimed to know things. Politicians knew about justice. Priests knew about the gods. Craftsmen knew their trades. And maybe they did know their specific skills. But when it came to the big questions, what is good? What is beautiful? What is the right way to live? Everyone was guessing, making it up, pretending certainty where none existed. Everyone except Socrates. He alone admitted his ignorance. And paradoxically, that admission made him wiser than everyone else. Because recognizing what you don't know is the first step toward actually learning something true. In 399 BCE, when Socrates was 70 years old, 3 citizens brought charges against him. The formal accusations were impiety, not believing in the gods of the city, and corrupting the youth of Athens. The real reasons were more complicated. Athens had just lost the Peloponnesian War, a devastating 27-year conflict with Sparta. The defeat shattered Athens' power and confidence. Democracy had been briefly overthrown by the tyrannical 30 tyrants, a brutal oligarchy that killed thousands before being overthrown and democracy restored. Some of Socrates' former students, including Alcibiades and Critias, had been involved in Athens' worst disasters. Alcibiades had betrayed Athens. Critias had led the 30 tyrants. And people wondered, did Socrates teach them to question democracy? Did his constant challenging of authority create these traitors? It wasn't fair. Socrates had never advocated tyranny. He had refused to participate in the 30 tyrants' crimes, even at risk to his own life. But guilt by association is powerful, especially in a traumatized, fearful city looking for someone to blame. The charges themselves were almost impossible to defend against because they were so vague. How do you prove you believe in the gods? How do you prove you're not corrupting youth? But Socrates didn't really try to defend himself in the normal way. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize. He didn't play the game of Athenian legal theater where defendants would bring their weeping children to court to evoke sympathy. Instead, he used his trial as an opportunity to do what he'd always done: question his accusers, expose their weak arguments, and defend the life he'd chosen. He argued that far from corrupting the youth, he had spent his life trying to make Athens better. That his questioning served the city, not harmed it. That examining beliefs was necessary for a healthy democracy. He said that if the jury convicted him, they would be harming themselves more than they'd be harming him, because they'd be killing the gadfly that keeps Athens honest, that prevents it from falling into complacent stupidity. And then he said something that probably sealed his fate. He suggested that instead of punishing him, Athens should reward him. Give him free meals for life, the honor reserved for Olympic victors and great benefactors of the city. He was being serious. He genuinely believed he deserved honor, not death. But to the jury, this sounded like arrogance, like mockery. The vote was close. 280 guilty, 220 not guilty. A shift of just 30 votes would have acquitted him. Athenian law required the accuser and the defendant to each propose a penalty. The accusers proposed death. Socrates was expected to propose exile or a fine, something the jury could accept as a compromise. But Socrates refused to propose anything that implied he'd done wrong. Eventually, his friends convinced him to propose a small fine. But it was too little too late, and seemed insincere. The jury voted again on the penalty. This time, the majority for death was larger. His defiance had angered them. Socrates was sentenced to death by hemlock poisoning. He had 1 month to live, the time it took for a religious ship to return from a sacred voyage, during which no executions could be carried out. What Socrates did in those final 30 days tells us everything about who he was. His friends came to him with a plan. They'd bribed the guards. They had money ready, a boat waiting. He could escape to another city, live out his remaining years in peace. It would be easy. The authorities would probably be relieved. No one really wanted to execute a 70-year-old philosopher. This was an out for everyone. But Socrates refused. He explained his reasoning in a conversation his student Crito recorded. It's one of the most powerful arguments for civil obedience and moral integrity ever written. Socrates said, "I've lived in Athens my whole life. I've benefited from its laws, its protection, its community. I'd had every opportunity to leave if I disagreed with the system, but I stayed. By staying, I implicitly agreed to abide by its laws. Now those laws have judged me, even unjustly. If I run, I'm saying that laws only matter when they benefit me, that I'll follow them when convenient and break them when not. But that destroys the entire foundation of law. If everyone did that, society collapses. Might makes right. Chaos wins. So even though the verdict is wrong, even though I don't deserve death, I must accept it, because breaking the law to save my life would be hypocritical. It would contradict everything I've stood for. I've spent my entire life arguing that we should live according to what's right, not what's easy or pleasant or beneficial. Now I have to prove I'm in it." His friends were devastated. They argued. They begged. But Socrates was unmoved. Crito suggested, "At least think of your children. Don't you owe them a father?" Socrates replied, "I owe them an example of how to live with integrity. Watching me run away to save my life while betraying my principles, that would harm them more than losing me would." So he stayed. And he spent his last days doing exactly what he'd always done, talking philosophy with anyone who would listen. The dialogues Plato wrote about these final days, especially the Phaedo, which describes Socrates' last conversation before drinking the hemlock, are some of the most moving texts in Western literature. Socrates spent his final hours discussing the immortality of the soul, whether death is something to fear, what it means to live a good life. His friends were crying, emotional, grieving, and Socrates was calm, curious, engaged, treating his own death as another opportunity to think clearly about an important question. One of his students asked, "How should we bury you?" And Socrates laughed. He said, "However you want. Because what you'll be burying isn't me. It's just my body. I, the real me, the soul, the consciousness, will be gone. So do whatever seems right to you. I won't be around to care." This wasn't coldness. It was acceptance. And it was freedom. He'd spent his whole life preparing for this moment, not because he wanted to die, but because he'd understood that death is inevitable and fear of it shouldn't control how you live. Finally, the time came. The jailer brought the cup of hemlock, already crying as he did so. He apologized to Socrates, said he knew this was unjust, that Socrates was the noblest man he'd ever met. Socrates thanked him, asked calmly about how the poison works. The jailer explained, "You drink it, walk around until your legs feel heavy, then lie down. The numbness will spread from your feet upward. When it reaches your heart, you'll die." Socrates asked a few more questions. Not afraid. Just curious, wanting to understand the process. Then he took the cup. His friends started sobbing, and Socrates scolded them gently. He said, "I sent the women away so we wouldn't have this kind of emotional display. Calm yourselves. A man should die in peace." They tried to compose themselves. And then Socrates drank the hemlock. All of it. Calmly. No hesitation. No drama. He walked around as instructed. When his legs grew heavy, he laid down. His friends sat with him as the numbness spread. Plato records that Socrates' last words were about a debt. "Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Pay it, and don't forget." Asclepius was the god of healing. Offering him a rooster was something you did when cured of an illness. Some scholars think this was Socrates' final statement. Death is the cure for the illness of life. I'm being healed. Remember to give thanks. Others think it was just a mundane debt he remembered. Either way, those were his words. Practical. Calm. Concerned about others until the very end. Then he was gone. The numbness reached his heart. Socrates, the man who never stopped asking questions, stopped breathing. So why does this matter? Why are we talking about an old man executed in Athens 2,400 years ago? Because Socrates' death proves something that changed the world. Ideas are more powerful than death. Athens killed Socrates. But they couldn't kill what he represented. They couldn't kill the questions he asked. They couldn't kill the example he set. In fact, by killing him, they made him immortal. If Socrates had died naturally in old age, he might have been forgotten. Another clever talker in a city full of them. But his execution transformed him into a martyr for truth, for free thought, for the examined life. Plato, his student, spent the rest of his life writing dialogues featuring Socrates as the main character, preserving his method, his questions, his spirit. Without Socrates' death, we probably wouldn't have Plato's philosophy. And without Plato, Western philosophy as we know it doesn't exist. Aristotle studied under Plato. Medieval Christian thinkers absorbed Platonic ideas. The Renaissance rediscovered these texts. The Enlightenment built on them. The entire Western intellectual tradition traces back, in large part, to this one weird, barefoot man asking uncomfortable questions in ancient Athens. But beyond the historical impact, Socrates' death poses a challenge to each of us. What are you willing to die for? What principles matter so much that you'd sacrifice everything rather than betray them? Most of us will never face that choice. We won't be put on trial for our beliefs. We won't be forced to choose between our life and our integrity. But we face smaller versions of that choice all the time. Do you speak up when everyone else is silent? Do you question the consensus even when it's easier to go along? Do you defend what's true even when it costs you friendships, status, opportunities? Or do you compromise? A little at first, then a little more. Until one day you realize you've become someone you don't recognize, someone who's traded integrity for comfort. Socrates refused to compromise, not because he was stubborn or arrogant, but because he understood that your principles only mean something if you're willing to pay for them. He said, "It's not living that matters, but living well. And living well means living justly and honorably. If life requires you to betray what's just and honorable, then what's the point? You're not really living. You're just surviving." And Socrates wasn't interested in mere survival. This is why his last days are so important. He wasn't just talking about integrity. He was demonstrating it, proving that a person can face death calmly if they've lived well. His friends were devastated, but Socrates was at peace, because he had nothing to regret. He'd lived according to his values. He'd pursued truth. He tried to make his city better. He'd never compromised his principles for ease or safety or approval. So when death came, he could meet it without fear, because he knew he'd lived well. Can you say the same? If you died tomorrow, would you be at peace with how you've lived? Or would you have regrets? Things you compromised on? Truths you stayed silent about? People you didn't stand up for? Socrates also showed us the cost of questioning authority. Athens killed him for asking questions, for making people uncomfortable, for exposing that the emperor, so to speak, had no clothes. Every society has its sacred cows, its unquestionable assumptions, its approved narratives, and every society punishes those who question them, sometimes with death, like Socrates, sometimes with exile, ridicule, cancellation, professional destruction. The methods change. The pattern doesn't. And Socrates reminds us, question anyway. Think anyway. Pursue truth anyway. Not because it's safe, but because it's necessary. Because a society that can't tolerate questions is a society in decline. And individuals who stop questioning are individuals who've stopped growing. The unexamined life is not worth living. That's not just a personal principle. It's a political one. A society of unexamined lives, of people who accept what they're told without thinking, is a society ripe for tyranny. Athens was a democracy, and it killed a man for thinking. That's the paradox Socrates exposed. Freedom means nothing if you're not free to question, to dissent, to challenge the consensus. And dying for that freedom, proving it matters more than your life, that's what made Socrates more than a philosopher. That made him a symbol, a reminder, a warning. So what does it actually mean to live an examined life? What would Socrates want you to do, not in ancient Athens, but right now in your world? First, question your assumptions. Not in a cynical, trust-nothing way, but honestly. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? Is it because you've thought it through? Or because you've been told to believe it? Socrates would walk up to you and ask, "You say you value honesty. But what is honesty? Is it always good? Are there times when lying is right? How do you know? You say you want to be successful. But what is success? Money? Status? Happiness? Meaning? Have you defined it? Or are you chasing a vague idea someone else gave you? You say you believe in justice. But what is justice? Equal treatment? Proportional response? Mercy? Fairness? And when these conflict, which matters more? These aren't academic questions. These are the questions that determine how you actually live. And most people never ask them. They just operate on autopilot, following scripts written by parents, culture, media, peers. Socrates would say, "Wake up. Think. Examine. Because you only get one life. Don't waste it living someone else's unexamined version of what a life should be." Second, embrace intellectual humility. Admit what you don't know. Socrates' wisdom came from recognizing his ignorance. The fool is the person who thinks they know everything. The wise person is the one who knows how much they don't know. This doesn't mean wishy-washy relativism, where all opinions are equally valid. It means being rigorous about what you actually know versus what you're guessing. Being willing to say, "I don't know," when you don't. Being open to changing your mind when presented with better arguments. Third, prioritize truth over comfort. Socrates could have lived quietly, avoided controversy, stayed safe. But he chose truth, even when it made him unpopular, even when it cost him his life. You'll face smaller versions of this choice. Moments where speaking truth will cost you something. Friendships, job opportunities, social approval, comfort. And you'll have to decide, is truth worth the cost? Or do you stay silent, go along, prioritize your comfort over what's right? Socrates would say, if you always choose comfort, you'll lose your soul slowly, one compromise at a time, until you don't recognize who you become. Fourth, live with integrity. Align your actions with your values. Don't just claim to believe things. Live them. Socrates didn't just talk about justice and courage. He lived them. He served in the military. He refused to participate in unjust orders even when threatened. He accepted death rather than betray his principles. Your principles are tested in moments of difficulty, not moments of ease. Anyone can be honest when honesty costs nothing. Anyone can be brave when there's no danger. Anyone can be kind when it's convenient. The question is, will you be these things when they cost you something? Finally, accept death. Not in a morbid way, but as a fact. You're going to die. So is everyone you love. This isn't depressing. It's liberating. If you're going to die anyway, why waste your limited time on resentment, pettiness, fear? Why not live well? Why not pursue what actually matters? Socrates faced death calmly because he lived well. He had no regrets. No compromise eating at him. No betrayed principles haunting him. Can you say the same? And if not, what are you waiting for? Before we end tonight, imagine this. You're 70 years old. You're sitting with friends. And someone asks you, if you had to choose between living 20 more years by betraying everything you believe, or dying tomorrow with your integrity intact, which would you choose? Socrates answered that question, not hypothetically, for real. And his answer was, integrity matters more than longevity. Truth matters more than safety. Living well matters more than just living. You probably won't face that choice in such stark terms, but you'll face versions of it. Small moments where you choose between what's right and what's easy, between speaking up and staying silent, between standing firm and compromising. And in those moments, you might remember Socrates, the man who walked barefoot through Athens asking uncomfortable questions, the man who made powerful people look foolish, the man who chose death over betraying his principles. And you might ask yourself, what would Socrates do? Not because he's a perfect model. He was weird, difficult, sometimes probably annoying, but because he understood something fundamental. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your thinking and the integrity of your actions. The unexamined life is not worth living. That's what he said. And that's what he proved by dying calmly, surrounded by friends, having spent his final hours discussing philosophy and asking questions. So examine your life. Question your assumptions. Pursue truth. Live with integrity. And when death comes, whenever it comes, meet it the way Socrates did, without fear, without regret, having lived well. Thank you for thinking with me tonight on Night Thinker. Sleep well. And may you wake tomorrow with the courage to ask one question you've been avoiding. Because that's what Socrates would want. Not for you to agree with him, but for you to think for yourself. And that might be the most dangerous, most important thing you ever do.